The Global Sport Institute is a research institute where diverse disciplines converge to thoughtfully examine critical issues impacting sport, and then trying to push for everything from policy to interventions and applications that will impact the world and make it better for everyone. We organize ourselves around a different theme each year. Our current theme is sex, gender, and sexuality in sport. We're trying to galvanize the researchers from around the globe, global partners, and folks who are artists, folks who are dealing with policy, folks who are making decisions in terms of apparel. We really want to open this up as a way of really trying to get a picture from each place, to have a deep conversation about sex, gender, and sexuality in sport.
It's essential that leadership in every sport establish a culture of respect.
Allows us to explore from multiple different areas and examine a little bit more of maybe the behind the scenes, of working in sport.
Sport should be opportunity for self-growth, healthy competition, community, and affirmation. It should be an opportunity for all genders, all sexualities to be able to thrive, to learn about themselves, to learn from each other, to collaborate.
When it comes to understanding sex, gender, and sexuality in sport, we have to realize that these things and these classifications do not occur in a silo.
Landmark ruling against Olympic gold medalist Caster Semenya.
She will not be able to compete in the 400 and the 800 meters and in the 1500 meters.
Sport is microcosm of life, but also sport has the ability to influence life.
It's hard to be what you can't see, so let's look at representation on all fronts, including social media, storytelling, marketing, in the office, on staff, who's in leadership positions.
Hearing that chant at the end was so special. People really do believe that, what we fight for is what is needed amongst the whole world.
Masculinity can be really negative force in these contexts of kind of everyday men's sport.
We need to commit to creating and sustaining more inclusive and diverse school sport context where all girls feel like they belong.
We can make a difference by working together to improve access to education, access to equipment and training facilities, and unfair pay or career growth opportunities.
This is a time for us to work individually and collectively for change on our teams and in the world.
Let's have some dialogue about how we in the sports community can not only help athletes live and be their authentic selves, but also help others to support and accept that we all show up differently, looking differently, behaving differently, and that's okay.
Two transgender high school runners, they're kicking up dust in Connecticut, leaving parents wondering if they have an unfair advantage.
So the more conversation we have, the more we will be able to build understanding and create a sports world that is more inclusive for everyone.
These three things represent who we are as people, the things that make us uniquely beautiful and different. And why this matters now is because we are becoming a more interconnected global community, and we're discovering more about different societies, cultures, and point of views. And so this year, we're going to explore these topics so we can have a better global understanding, and most importantly, enhance our global community and bring us together.
We are amplifying the power of sport. We have a unique opportunity to learn from each other and from those who are making progress. We are inviting industry leaders, decision makers, scholars inside and out of sport to look at what their discipline is doing, and then to use that as a starting point for thinking of what that might mean in terms of sport.
Because understanding
sport matters.
Welcome everyone to the Global Sport Matters live show, part of Global Sport Institute and Arizona State University, which sits on the ancestral lands of the Maricopa and Pima peoples. The video you just previewed is our annual Global Sport Institute research theme exploring sex, gender, and sexuality in sport. On the show today, we have actually a few of our researchers, Elena Zanin, as well as Vera Lopez, and of course our host, Victoria Jackson. Elena and Vera are both professors and researchers examining barriers and identity for girls participating in sport. And they'll share a bit about their work throughout the show here too. So we are excited, obviously, for today's show, diving into the topic, is 2021 the year for women and girls sport? This show is also kicking off our newest issue on the same topic, looking at the power of women and girls in sport. And we are dropping a link right now into the chat for you to actually be able to view all of the wonderful stories that are included. So inside of this issue are stories looking at the power of representation. We also are looking at role models to show girls they are athletes, the impact of policy changes for name, image, and likeness, and what that impact will have on women's sport. The ongoing battle for equal coverage of not just women's sport, but women in sports media, and lots of other stories coming along the way. So we are excited for you to obviously hear and share what you have learned here today. But also please do check out our newest issue and read and share those stories along the way there too. So now on to the show. On today's panel, we have a phenomenal lineup of women, including Phaedra Knight, president of the Women's Sports Foundation, World Rugby Hall of Fame inductee, entrepreneur, MMA fighter, the list goes on. We're very excited to have Phaedra joining us today. We also have Dr. Jen Welter, NFL's first female coach, Gridiron Girls founder, first female coach in Madden, first female running back in men's pro football, author, motion and emotion pioneer, just amazing speaker. We're really excited to hear from you as well, Dr. Welter. And of course, we have Elena Zanin, assistant professor of organizational and health communications at Arizona State University. Joining her is Vera Lopez, professor of justice and social inquiry in the School of Social Transformation. And as mentioned, our wonderful host for today is Victoria Jackson, sport historian and clinical assistant professor of history in the School of Historical, Philosophical, and Religious Studies. And both Elena, Vera, and Victoria are all seed grantees of our Global Sport Institute, as well as scholars, meaning that they have and continue to do research with our institute, which we are very proud of. So throughout the show, please share your comments and questions with our panel using the Q&A box, which is located right at the bottom of your Zoom screen there. So feel free to go ahead, and if you have any questions or comments for the panel, we'll make sure to kind of moderate that and get your questions out there the best way that we can. Look to the chat. We're going to be dropping lots of great information throughout the show. So definitely keep an eye on that as you're listening and hearing what's going on. And if you do share on social media what you hear and see today, do tag us. We are at Global Sport Matters. That's Global Sport MTRS, and hashtag Global Sport Matters, all spelled out. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our wonderful host, Victoria.
Hi, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Phaedra. Thank you, Jen. Do you prefer Dr. Welter or do you prefer Jen for this conversation today? And Phaedra, you have a PhD in rugby, so Dr. Knight, perhaps. How should I address you both for this conversation?
You can actually call me PK.
PK, okay, see, thank you. PK.
Yeah.
I was gonna say Dr. Knight just told them all good night, so like that's what that was. You can call me Jen or Dr. Jen. Dr. Welter's my dad.
Okay.
I'll be looking around, see if I'm in trouble.
Thanks. Well, this first segment, we're going to be talking about the role of women in sport. And I really like this because it's flipping what we often do, I think, in the girls and women in sports spaces, which is talking about the importance of sport for girls and women. But this time we kind of get to think about and talk around what we bring to the table and the kind of innovation I think we've seen, especially in this last year, this pandemic year. And the Deloitte Sports Industry Outlook predicted the rise of women's sports in 2020. And then, like anybody who studies, like I do, the history of women's sports, like of course the pandemic comes next, right? Like, oh, things are getting good. And then of course, this cruel irony that we have a pandemic, an unprecedented pandemic year that brings sports to a stop. And I was listening to Commissioner Lisa Baird talk recently with Sarah Spain on her podcast, That's What She Said. And I really liked what Commissioner Baird said about, sport was the first industry to take this seriously and shut it down. And, we often talk about how sport is less sophisticated or, this escape from the rest of the world. But it really underscored the power of sport and that people do take sport seriously, that once sports shut down, people were like, oh, we need to be careful here. And this is a serious thing that we're going to be dealing with for some time. But the plot twist, I think we saw a plot twist, which is that, of course, women hustle. Girls and women have hustled in this space. I mean, in order to play, you have to hustle. I think we all know this. And so women got to work, and we saw actually an exceptional year for women in sport, with the NWSL being the first women's professional league in the United States to come back and have a successful tournament in Utah, with the Frauen Bundesliga in Germany coming back alongside the Bundesliga for the men. This was happening in places around the world, and something interesting was going on. We saw, TV viewership increase for women's sports, where we saw declines for men. We saw innovation around like streaming services. And then we saw all of these women athletes get excited around ownership and thinking differently about what women's sports can look like, with Angel City Football Group, with Serena Williams as part of that, with Naomi Osaka, with the Carolina team, now with Sarah Spain, again, shouting that out, with the Chicago Red Stars. So there's been a lot of excitement, and I think that's been the plot twist. So riding this wave and with this understanding that, this hustle that we bring, we need to capitalize on that and celebrate it and continue this progress going forward. Phaedra, let's start with you. Again, we often talk about the role that sport can play in a girl or woman's life. Flipping it, what do women bring to sport?
Oh, God. Great question. I think, am I muted? Sorry, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, great. Just making sure. I lost access to my screen. Women bring everything to sport. They bring any and everything that men bring, quite honestly. We bring a finesse, I think, that no one else brings. We bring a sort of a hidden genius, because we haven't been present so much in leadership positions as we should. So there's a ton of untapped genius there. But women bring a ton. We bring a different way of thinking to sport. We bring a different way of communicating to sport. Everything that we bring, I think, in society, we essentially bring to sport. And it's that element that makes, I think, that breeds success. You've mentioned many of the great names: Serena Williams, Billie Jean King, Jackie Jonah Kersey. I had people here, Jen Welter, right? These are first. These are people who have been first, who have broken through the glass ceiling. So they've brought a vision to many other girls that you can. They have to see it to be it. And so I think that's probably one of the most important things that women have brought to sport. They've brought this resilience and ingenuity that, I don't think any man, no offense, but no man could ever bring.
Thank you for that, PK. And I called you Phaedra after you said call me PK. So thanks, PK.
Okay, but you caught
it. And you know, Dr. Jen, PK was just talking about barrier breakers, and I think what you know, you exemplify is, you know, not just being the first and kind of owning that and celebrating that, but then thinking about, okay, well, how can I bring others through with me? Can you talk a little bit about the work that you've been doing with Gridiron Girls and elsewhere too?
Yeah, for sure. And I just wanted to build on what PK said. It's, you know, one of the things that women bring to sports, particularly the ones, quote, non-traditional sports, is that we didn't get into it for the same reasons that the guys did, right? It wasn't like I'm going to play football because, you know, I can make $1 million, right? All of the women playing football were doing it because not only could we change the sport, but we could change the culture through sport, right? I mean, think about it. They call it the final frontier for women in sports. So for me, it was like, if we can do this and we can do it the right way, can't we show that there's no place and no space that women don't belong and that women can't lead? And that passion and that fire that does drive women to be hustlers, that does drive us to have, you know, 47 jobs so that we can afford to play our sport, means that the rules aren't quite the same for us. And the passion is a driver, and the platform then becomes an opportunity to shift culture. And I think that the WNBA did that particularly well in the pandemic. You know, not only are they innovating and making sure that everybody's safe, but they really took stands through their position and platform that influenced, you know, culture and our government. And part of that is because, you know, we as women weren't told ever that we got it easy, right? It's not the same path, it's not the same passion. And I think that because of that, we take it very to heart that this means something, right? And I know that is for me, like when I don't have the energy, when I don't feel like I can go on, when I'm, you know, tired of maybe the politics or something, I literally challenge myself. I say, if you don't have enough, then another woman should have been the first female to coach in the NFL. Then somebody else should be here, right? If I don't feel strong enough to stand up and, you know, make a point for other girls and women, then I don't deserve this position, right? Because we need somebody who's going to champion other people and who's going to, you know, be bold enough to stick her foot in the door so it can't be closed after. And, you know, I do my best, and I don't think any of us are perfect, right? Like there are things I look at, I'm like, oh, I could have done better there, or I could have, you know, but to look at the situation on how, as the first, you know, it's the opportunity and responsibility to ensure you're not the last, right? With Gridiron Girls, there was nobody doing a national movement for girls in flag. So somebody's got to do it. And you kind of look around and you're like, oh, okay, I guess that's me. I didn't necessarily know the best way to do it or the right way to do it. But what I did know is that the right thing was to do it. And that I had to start somewhere. We can always get better, but these things and being distinctive in sport mean that we are not only just playing the sport, but we're playing the sport with the intention that we can change culture through sports, because sports do lead culture. And anyone who thinks that they're inseparable or should be separated is selling athletes and the power of sport very short.
I think that's fantastic. And, you know, it's always funny, I think, when people say, you know, sports and politics shouldn't mix, because if you're a woman, if you're a person of color, if you're LGBTQ, it's a political thing to be playing sport because of power structures that have worked people deploying power for so long to keep certain bodies and identities out. And I often in my work talk about how sports are about bodies and athletes are often the front lines where ideas about bodies play out in society and politics. And a historical through line in women's sport has been the attempts at policing, surveilling, analyzing women's bodies, and the deployment of pseudoscience to achieve political goals. How are you, PK, with the Women's Sports Foundation, meeting issues like, and just for example, we've had a lot going on in the last couple years around maternity and pregnancy and postpartum protections, anti-transgender legislation in schools, pay equity issues in professional sports, and beyond that, kind of just simple everyday forms of misogyny and sexism. How is the Women's Sports Foundation and how are you, PK, addressing these things head on?
Oh, great question. I'll start with the latter. So how I'm addressing these things head on is I've created, this is a great opportunity to segue, created a company called Psk Collective. And we're actually partnering with the Women's Sports Foundation. They are our benefactor, but we are an apparel company, and we're really anchored in social justice. Our immediate focus is equal pay, right? Women's equity and equal pay. And so, you got to put your money where your mouth is. That's how the world, as much as we love it or hate it, that's how the world turns. And so what we've decided to do as an organization is to intrinsically infuse in our business model a give back, 15% of our profits to, at this point, the Women's Sports Foundation. As we evolve, we'll be donating more to other organizations as well. But you've got to really, there are a number of people that are on the ground, on the front lines doing the hard work. They need money to really amplify their voice. And so from my personal perspective, that's what I'm doing. I've created this clothing line, and I'm using the voices and unified with 10 other athletes, and we will be expanding that. And obviously we will have influencers out there that will join this coalition, if you will, to really talk about these social injustice issues that you have mentioned, and be a bit confrontational about it. We're going to wear it on our clothing. We're going to remind everyone everywhere of where we are and where we need to be, and that the fact that we're here to help us get there. But simultaneously, we're going to fuel these organizations like the Women's Sports Foundation financially so that they can continue to do the work that they're doing and continue to chip away at this mountain, at this glacier. The Women's Sports Foundation, I mean, there are so many ways that they're doing this work, right? And the foundation does it in a number of different ways. Whether it's doing it through the programming, right? Doing it through the research. And on the programming part, we have all of these community impact programs that empower parents, they empower coaches, community leaders, and administrators. They give the tools to these folks, and in an effort to increase girls' athletic participation and positively impact her world. The foundation provides financial assistance to aspiring female athletes. When you can give that bit of assistance and support to a young girl, to a young woman, oh my God, you're giving them an opportunity to just flourish. And so those things alone help combat these things around pay equity, around misogyny, you name it. The foundation's also, involved in partnerships, partnering with elite athlete ambassadors, partnering with corporations, right? Like-minded organizations and supporters to really maximize innovation, engagement, and the impact. And then on the research side, the foundation are leaders in examining the impact of physical activity and sport on girls and women, and really focusing in on those gaps in access and opportunity. So we're amplifying, we're really putting people on notice on what's still missing out there. Really bringing forth gender equity and strategies to boost engagement. And everything we do is evidence-based. We use evidence-based data, widely among sport, among governmental and community-based organizations to really shape policies and practice. And so that's how the foundation has been doing it for quite some time. And that's how we continue to contribute as an organization to this war, if you want to call it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I feel compelled to shout out Nona Lee with the Arizona Diamondbacks, who's been involved with the Women's Sports Foundation and got me involved in doing work kind of at a local scale with the Phoenix Women's Sports Association that she founded here, and kind of taking the great ideas and structure of a national organization and putting it into practice on the ground locally in the Phoenix area. We are going to shift, and Elena and Vera, if you'd like to join us via video for the next segment, which is access to sport. And next year, 2022, is the 50th anniversary of Title IX, the law which mandates gender equity in schools, and in a sports sense, provides the equal opportunity to play school sports. I like talking about Title IX in this way, rather than saying it prevents discrimination. I like to speak positively about it, providing the equal opportunity to play school sports. And, since schools in the United States are largely unequal still, despite Brown, on the basis of race, we see that sporting opportunities for white suburban girls have generally been far superior to Black and brown girls and their sporting opportunities. And, this means because of less developmental K through 12 opportunities, we see less Black, Latina, and Indigenous women playing college sports, and especially beyond the sports of basketball and track and field. Vera, your research has looked at Latina girls' participation in sports. What are the access barriers that you're finding?
So thank you for bringing up the intersection of race, ethnicity, gender, class, et cetera, to really amplify the issue for girls of color and girls of color from lower incomes, because that is an important area to focus on. I think when thinking about access, there's access, but I think we need to think about inclusion. We need to think about diversity. We need to think about equity. So I think we need to broaden the conversation. And we can have access, but if girls aren't signing up, or coaches aren't inviting girls of color to sign up, or they're signing up and they are not feeling like they belong, then that's a big problem. So I encouraged us to look at kind of multi-level interventions that look at the structures. My work focuses on schools. And so what can schools do to provide girls of color, in particular Black and brown girls, like they feel like they belong? How can they support that? How do they reach it out? Historically, if we look at this, in the social sciences is complicit in blaming Black and brown girls and families for not joining, right? For Latina girls, the families aren't traditional. They want the girls to be in the home. They rely on stereotypes and perceptions to essentialize, in this case, Latina girls. So I think we need to hold schools, youth organizations accountable for facilitating what access looks like, but we need to broaden it to look at inclusion, diversity, equity, and all around a sense of belonging.
Thank you, Vera. I've spent time talking about Title IX outside of the United States, and we are really fortunate that we have this civil rights law focused on schools and equity. And we're also kind of unique in the world in the United States in that we have elite sport development through our school systems. So it's like we have these structures in place, but because of continuing inequities in schools, we're not living up to the promise of this law, like so many other civil rights laws. This is one of many civil rights laws in the United States in which we're not living up to the promise. But thanks to people doing work on the ground, and it's often locally grassroots, people are holding institutions and the people in power behind those institutions accountable. So What's that?
I'd like to add, to this with the interviews and the focus groups that I've conducted with girls and coaches is the idea we have two different systems now in place. So we still have, for example, segregation in this country, even though it's not legal, it still is in practice with schools. And we're also seeing that in the sports arena with youth sports. So we still have very much segregated sport context where we have the club sports where parents are putting a lot of income and helping their kids succeed, but then we have the public school sports. And so we're definitely, there are lots of structural issues related to access and opportunities. So, but yes, we need to do more work in this area for sure.
Awesome. Yes, I'm with you on that. Elena, your research looks at role models and representation in sport, and I think in schools as well. What have you found in your research?
Yeah, so I did just want to add, Title IX, while it's created all of this opportunity, any federal policy is always open to reinterpretation and circumvention. And so I think this is also something to note that Title IX is not a panacea. And I think going along with what Vera was saying, it doesn't address issues of intersectionality in terms of race, class, ethnicity, all of those things. And so what I was seeing, we recently did a study about girls transitioning into high school, and this focused on pretty affluent girls in suburban Phoenix that belong to a soccer club team. And then we also had a control group of girls who were not currently participating in sport in the same age range. And in comparing those two groups in their transitional year into high school, we found that there were several issues around messaging they were receiving from their peers, but also several issues related to structural access issues. So for example, while schools may be adhering to Title IX by offering no-cut sports to both girls and boys who are freshmen in high school, if the popularity of their sport, right? So if they're playing soccer since they're 3 years old, and then these girls try out for their high school team that only has 9 spots available for a school of 2,000 students, they are now, and they don't make that high school team, even though they've been playing since they're 3 years old. They're now thinking, I don't belong here, right? I'm not good enough. I'm not an athlete. We see this as a much larger issue for girls of color, right? Where maybe they don't have a freshman soccer team, right? Or they don't have a freshman basketball team. And then if you compare that to high school boys sports, there's a 60 spot no cut football team that's available for freshman players, for boys transitioning into high school. So that's just one example of how we might begin to imagine how can we offer more recreational opportunities for girls to engage and try out sports that might be appealing to them that they've been playing for many years. So that's just 2 cents.
Yeah, I think when we're talking about school settings, one thing that's tripped us up a bit in the United States is, again, because our elite sport development is in schools, that prioritization around elite sports development has hurt participation opportunities. This has happened in the collegiate space, and it trickles down. And so, I was listening to, and I highly recommend listening to Alexi Pappas's new book. Listen to it because she narrates it herself, and she's an actor as well.
I love her.
Yeah, and I was shocked to find out, because she's a recent Olympian. She competed in Rio in 2016 and only graduated from college a couple years before that she was told she could not be a multi-sport athlete in high school, that the boys were allowed to be multi-sport athletes, but the girls, because she was so good at running, was forced to specialize. And so she quit the track team to play soccer instead. And she tells it in a very comical way and shows up because she was so good, was recruited to compete in college at Dartmouth, and then, you know, goes on to become an Olympian in the 10,000 meters on the track. But, you know, that there's just these kind of baseline assumptions that benefit boys and harm girls. And one of those is this idea of the multi-sport athlete. Everybody benefits from that, but to privilege boys in that situation and deny girls that is absolutely a problem. Dr. Jen, I want to ask you a question. You know, I do a lot of work kind of thinking about how the United States is this exceptional place in sport, and historians rarely like to talk about American exceptionalism. Because of all these kind of quirky historical forces, soccer becomes kind of gendered female in the United States when it's the world's manly sport, you know, historically the sport through which boys and men prove their manliness. And in a US context, soccer evolves into American football, and American football is that sport in which boys and men prove their manliness. And so, you know, taking what Latina was talking about with stereotypes, right? These are all artificial ideas. It's not fact that boys and men prove their manliness through playing football, right? It's artificial, it's constructed. But those are really powerful ideas. Can you, you know, from your, I mean, you bring so much expertise to this topic, you know, since you're a psychologist, you know, the NFL's first female coach, now what you're doing with girls playing flag football. Can you talk about the best ways in which and kind of a tips for our audience to combat stereotypes around this space?
I mean, there's a lot in that question, and obviously some great points. I think how we portray things is a very important thing, right? I think soccer emerged as, you know, a female sport here because it was one that we were actually allowed to celebrate for girls. I don't think anybody intentionally did not celebrate guys, but with such strong role models too in the women's national team, I think the women just dominated, right? And I'm not gonna say for 1 second that they shouldn't dominate, because, you know, it's hard as women to not see those women and say, yeah, right? And there were feeder systems, and there was training in place, and there were opportunities where girls could excel. I don't think it's, you know, at the extent that it can't be for boys, right? But there are also a lot more options for boys that become, you know, very viable options, right? And it is an interesting one that, you know, everywhere else it's football and here it's American football, right? But that sport, if you're contrasting, is the same season, right? So it does become a dichotomy of, you know, you're probably either going to play football or you're going to play soccer because they're in the same season, right? In terms of high school competition. And so I think that's more of where you see it, and that the women were so good. And by contrast, there's not a female equivalent, right? So in football, it's really the sport that, you know, has for so long. I mean, they refer to it as the final frontier for women in sports, right? I remember seeing the title of the book, you know, the stronger women get, the more men love football. So that sport in particular has been one where it was like an either or. Even think about the constructs of Thanksgiving, where, you know, the men are in watching football and you see the women in the kitchen. This is probably why I'm a terrible cook to this day, because I gravitated towards that football option instead. So to me, what we have to do is increase the conversation surrounding how we show people differently, right? When I wanted to start Gridiron Girls, everybody said girls don't want to play. And I said, no, that's not true. Girls have never had the opportunity to decide if they wanted to play. And oh, by the way, to step into a situation where they weren't fundamentally behind because the boys were socialized differently. And then it was a hard step to get into. If the boys have been taught how to catch and throw and do all those things, and then a girl goes into a co-ed situation, usually the counterpunch is, oh, well, you catch like a girl or you throw like a girl. No, In football, it's either you actually throw a football like you've been taught or you don't. And you either catch it with your diamonds up and your attitude, which by the way, diamonds are a girl's best friend. I don't know if you guys missed that, but you either catch it that way or you don't. So there are fundamental barriers that would make it harder for a girl to kind of break that boundary. And there was an equivalent, right? And yet, once we started getting out there and people could see it, and we portrayed the girls differently, and we're very intentional about giving the hero shots to these girls, and making sure that they look like they are extraordinary, not that they are the exception to a rule, right? Or we just kind of let her come here. Like, this isn't someone else's game that you're just coming into. Like, this is your game, right? And you belong just like everybody else. And I think that kind of imaging around sports where kids look confident and they look good and you can look at them and see yourself is very important. And I think, globally, you have that imagery for soccer. You don't hear it in the States as much, except you do have the women being fierce and phenomenal. And then by contrast, football is traditionally very, very male, right? Like, and those are all examples of, what I like to say, there are certain places and spaces that suffer from sins of omission, right? You don't have to tell somebody they can't do it. That's reinforcing every place and space they cannot see themselves or someone that looks like them, right? It's really hard to project yourself up into a position through dreaming and visualization and all of those things if there's nobody who looks like you, right? And so even in whether it's the quote unquote actual world or the virtual world or the esports world or the storytelling world, it's important that we look at representation in all of those conversations. Because, for example, if the sports world isn't quite there yet, guess what we can drive it in? The esports world, right? Because you can socialize some of those things in that space as well. So we just have to be intentional about looking at some of those stereotypes and figuring out ways to combat them. But it doesn't happen by accident. And I think that's what you see play out.
And Jen, I want to just follow up and say, I really appreciate the idea of intentionality and like sins of omission, because that is so important. When I do work that looks at the intersections of race and ethnicity, gender, class, and sports omission. And when I asked Latina girls, 78 girls in focus groups, to name a Latina role model, one came up, and that was Lori Hernandez. And this was the summer when I was doing the focus groups. And that was the only Latina sport role model that they could come up with. And they couldn't come up with a lot of women role models, period. But, so I think you're absolutely right. Being intentional, showing role models, and being aware of how we exclude by not including and not amplifying what women are doing in sports.
Yeah, and I just wanted to follow up. I think those are both such good points in terms of if you're not seeing identity targets in the spaces in which you're participating, you are then reinforcing that your identity doesn't belong, right? And that kind of relates to a study that we completed in 2019, where we asked girls who recently participated in sport and a group of girls who hadn't recently participated in sport. These are elementary school age girls. And we asked them to draw an example of an athlete, an example of a girl, and an example of themselves. And then we content analyzed those drawings and tested for differences among those groups. And what we found, unsurprisingly, is that girls who had recently participated in sport were more likely to draw an athlete as a girl. And they were also more likely to draw themselves as participating in sport. And so I think what those findings indicate is that when you expose girls to sport and you let them try on those identities, they're more likely to see themselves as athletes. And the same goes, Jen, what you were talking about, if they're able to see a female coach teaching them and doing and enacting that athletic identity, they're like, yes, I can do this. I can, you know, I can throw a ball, right? And so I definitely think that it's like, it's the chicken before the egg issue, right? So we have to give them, empower them, give them the confidence, give them the role model, but then also give them the opportunity to enact and try on that athletic identity.
Thank you, Elena. You know, I saw an announcement just today. Elena, I hear that you're a distance runner as well, and I am too. And you know, the running community, I think, had a very important reckoning that was long overdue when Ahmaud Arbery was killed. That, you know, our sport is about claiming public space and using our bodies in public. And it turns out it's actually not true that anybody can just lace up and go for a run. That rhetoric held by most white runners does not play out on the ground in the realities of people's lives. And, you know, a number of really important people doing work about running while Black, running while a Black woman like Allison Desir. And just today, a new training group, Angel City Elite, was announced in LA, and it's a group of Latina and Indigenous women who have been qualifying for, some of them participated in the US Olympic trials last year, about just a year ago. And some of them are trying to hit qualifiers for the upcoming US track and field Olympic trials. And they have a sponsorship with Brooks Running Company. That signals legitimacy. And that shoe companies are now grappling with and dealing with the fact that they've had blinders on as well. And so props to this group, these women, I'm sure, who've worked very hard to get this organized, and then also to Brooks for sponsoring them and giving them gear and really awesome uniforms and the legitimacy that comes with the sponsorship. Yeah, I mean, this is really all about power, what we're talking about, and in a sporting context, you know, it's not that women around the world weren't playing soccer, it's that they were playing it in large numbers, and this was seen as transgressive. And because it was so popular, because the women, you know, in the case of England, you know, Dick Kerr ladies was breaking records for attendance. They were incredibly popular. And that's when the English FA institutes its 50-year ban. It's because women were having fun and playing and turning out in large numbers that places like Brazil as well, you know, and Brenda Elsie's work on this is so important. And so, you know, our role as educators of places like Arizona State University is pointing out that these kind of progressive narratives are kind of problematic in that there's an assumption behind them that women didn't play sports in the past and now they're starting to play, but it's actually more complicated. It's that women have played all throughout. It's just whether or not they're playing and being accepted for playing, or if they're pushed to the margins. And it's often when women become too popular that then they're forced out and having to go and play in the margins. So yeah, I think this conversation is just so wonderful for me to hear. I do want to switch to our final segment, which is future looking and forward looking, and hopefully optimistically so. Is 2021 the year for women and girls in sport? You know, with hope, we're coming off a pandemic year or years, hopefully singular. And it's been really rough and exacerbating kind of, you know, disparities within all sorts of communities, both in the United States and worldwide. So I say kind of in a cautionary way, maybe there's some opportunity here, but at the same time acknowledging, you know, how tragic this all has been. PK, let's turn it to you. What have you learned from this 2020 year, and what lessons are you taking forward to inform your work?
Oh, well, I've learned a tremendous amount. I've learned that, you know, difficult times really sort of show the real face of life and the real face of people. I've learned that, you know, self-care is an absolute priority. It is certainly not something that's privilege for us. I've you know, I've learned the beauty of patience. I've learned a bit of empathy, and grown a bit more empathetic to the world in general. Um, the list goes on and on. Um, Going forward, though, it's just really not to take anything for granted, and you know, live life today as if it's your last, because it could very well be. And with that, it's about, that to me drives um, more authenticity in how I live, more genuine um, intent behind how I live, and really to put a hand out and help as many people as possible, because you really don't know if it's going to be your last day of service, or if it's going to be that person's last day, in the world. And so, or it could be, it could be your help or my help could very well change the trajectory of that person's life. And so, I think it doesn't, I haven't really changed, I guess, how I live now versus how I lived before. But this experience of 2020 has certainly made things a bit more realistic, right? It's given all of us an opportunity to reset and to really fine tune, how we go forward. And so it's just to continue to chip away. And if nothing else, I guess I've gained a bit more motivation, a bit more drive, a bit more hunger to really get after it and put things into full swing. Not to waste a minute. So those are my real immediate reflections on 2020.
I appreciate that, PK. I think we all do. Dr. Jen, what are your goals? Let's pivot a little bit and think goals maybe. What are your goals for 2021?
Well, I think, personally, I'm going to put mine kind of to the back and look first to say, in your original question, is it the year for women in sports? Yes. And it's going to be the year until next year is an even better year. And it's going to be the year until the next year is even better, because the momentum is there. And I think that we are, without a doubt, on an upswing of really the conversation driving that we need to alter a lot of the things surrounding it, right? Girls need to see female role models. We need better pay equity in sports. We need opportunities that are more inclusive in every way, shape, or form. Now, those solutions take a little bit longer, right? But I think for the first time in a long time, we're really talking about them and looking at where can we make change? Where can we decisively, make sure more girls are getting opportunities to play, right? Where can we make sure that, we are not looking at sports through a lens that does not include Black and brown communities, that we're looking at the dollars that can be prohibitive and saying we've got to change this because there are so many good benefits that go with participation. So this is the year for women. I think that, soccer led by getting out on the field. I think that the WNBA led in terms of social change. I know football, we've seen women in big places, like women in the Super Bowl, and the NAIA added their first varsity flag football season. So for the first time now in our society, you could change the trajectory of your life and your family's life through education by playing football. What does that mean? There's going to be more dollars. The NFL already pledged that they were going to help develop high school girls flag football, which I know if you're watching, it seems like it should have already been there. But it's not, and it's far from there, right? And this is America's game. So we really do have to do a better job in America and in other countries to lead that equality conversation, right? And where those things are happening. And you can see even, brands like Adidas that came in and sponsored Gridiron Girls and, had me as their first female endorser as a football person, right? And then also sponsored the WNFC, which is the Women's Tackle Football League, right? We're going to see more brands coming in to have impact in women's sports, which again, perpetuates that cycle because now you're going to see it. It looks cool. Guess what? Girl's going to say, I want to do that. I want to be Phaedra Knight because she's tough and rugby is cool, right? Like I didn't even know rugby existed until I got to college. And then I fell in love. I was like, where has this sport been my whole life? Right. And so we need these wonderful, diverse, talented, tough women who, are grinding and skilled to be where every girl can have their poster. I want girls to be able to say like, that is an amazing sport. And I want her poster on my wall because what she did to get there, I can do it. And the doors are opening, right? And they are continuing to. So to me, in terms of personal goals, I want to be a part of amplifying those conversations. I want to be a part of making sure that we are having the talks that need to be talked, that we are celebrating the women who need, to be celebrated, that we are pushing companies to put their dollars where their causes are, right? That they claim, but we're putting the dollars there, and that we make the dollars make sense so that we as consumers are going and consuming female sports, right? That we're wearing that WNBA sweatshirt, that we're saying, you know what? I'm not a basketball player, right? I'm 5'2". Full disclosure, it was never the sport that I gravitated to, but you know what I'll go watch? I'll go watch those women because I have a vested interest in seeing them win in our society because I want every other girl to see them too. So to me, those are the most important things. And we have to unify around them and also get out of our individual sport silos. Because that's one of the things that I know we've seen that guys do better about than women do. Really leaving our sports silo and elevating women's sports, or, saying like, I'm going to go to a rugby match and I'm going to shout it out and I'm going to be in the front row, right? Or I'm going to highlight these women. So we have to cross-pollinate and not live in a place of scarcity, right? Where it's like, we can't bring up another sport because it's going to take something from ours. No, it's not. No, it's absolutely not. The movement is here and we need other people to catch up. So.
Great. That was fantastic, Dr. Jen. Thank you. I'm in. Sign me up.
Let's go.
Elena, how about you?
My plans are, can you restate the question? Sorry.
Yeah, what are reflecting on what's gone down in the last year, or expanding that out to the last few years and your work and your research, what projects have you excited? What work are you ready to get at in 2021?
Yeah, so as an organizational communication scholar, what I'm really interested in is how can we look at inter-organizational collaboration to increase access opportunities for girls' sport. So what does that look like for me in the next year or two? Well, I'm working with Dr. Lopez and I think Dr. Allison Ross is in attendance here. But we have developed an applied coaching course where we are seeking out students to go out in the community. We're going to have them for 4 weeks in the classroom, and then they're actually going to serve, be an intern and be a coach for a new youth access site for girls. So we're partnering with Girls on the Run. Girls on the Run has been partnering with Boys and Girls Clubs throughout the Phoenix metro area. And then we're hopefully supplying really well-trained, empowered, many women of color coaches that are also ASU students to go and be those female role models for these girls. So that's my hope and my dream. We got a little derailed with COVID, but I have full confidence that spring of 2022, we will be fully ready to go. So
awesome. And just knowing how open Sun Devil Athletics is to bringing girls to campus, I'm sure Dina Gardner-Smith, our senior woman administrator, will want to speak with you about these coaches and then also their teams and bringing them in to do like a clinic with Charlie Turner Thorne or something like that too. That sounds great.
Great partnership. Yeah, we should talk more. Yeah.
Awesome. And Vera, how about you?
So I want to thank Elena for mentioning that project. So it's a lot of fun. And
also supported by the Global Sport Institute.
Yes, also supported by Global Sport Institute. I recently started serving on the Girls on the Run National Commission, and it's called the IDEA Commission, and it stands for Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Access. And so that's what I've been doing a lot this year. And what I like about Girls on the Run as a nonprofit is they really are specific with what they want folks to volunteer to do. And so if you sign up, you're going to be expected to work, which is fine. I like that they are kind of moving in charge of how can they more intentionally, going back to Jen's comment about needing to be intentional about inclusion and what that looks like. So we've been talking not only in terms of race, ethnicity, but LGBTQ youth, youth with disabilities. How can we broaden, who do we include and what does that look like? And so this next couple of years, actually it's a 3-year term, I will be working at a national level with that organization. And specific to COVID, a plus is Zoom. So we have people all over the country on the commission and we can work on these issues collaboratively together. And of course, I will continue to be that person that says, well, what about, let's make sure that include these other identities in the conversation as opposed to gender, yes, but gender plus.
Fantastic. Well, I want to be respectful of everyone's time. Thank you, PK. Thank you, Dr. Jen. Thank you, Elena. Thank you, Vera. Thank you to our audience, and thank you to the Global Sports Institute and Global Sport Matters. Kendall, I'm going to hand it back over to you. Thank you all. This is fantastic.
Thank you, Victoria. And again, just to kind of echo, really appreciate the conversation, the insights, everything that has come out of this conversation today. And if anything, these conversations prove that we need to continue connecting, and whether that's virtually, whether that's, in the future in person, this is really important. And I love that we're all on the same page. This is the year for women and girls sport, and it will only continue to build, as Dr. Jen mentioned there. So attendees, if you can just hold on, we've got some more information coming to you into the chat. Panelists, if you've got to jump off, I know you got busy schedules. Thank you so much for your time, and we really appreciate it. And so for those that are with us still, attendees, we just want to, again, drop into the chat our newest issue, The Power of Women and Girls in Sport, and invite you to read, share, listen, and continue having these conversations and reach out to us with your comments and questions as well. And we've also included ways that you can follow us. And again, definitely follow these phenomenal women and the work that they're doing all throughout women's sport and beyond. So again, we started with a question of, we obviously hear about the role that sport plays in women's lives, but just as important, the incredible role that women play in sport. So with that, we hope that you'll join us next month as we continue to look at this year that we have been in. Obviously, many of us are kind of looking at the calendar going, oh my gosh, it's been a year already. So we'll be exploring that topic a bit further in looking at what sort of events, you know, thinking about activism, thinking about Black Lives Matter, thinking about different areas of sports that are impacted, that have changed, and what have we come to a year later, and how will we continue to make sport better? So join us next time. And again, thank you so much for joining us. See you next time.